All of these pumpkins today are going to be made from scrap wood. My husband Randy cut out of one piece of wood that design there. I was showing you the back. What I did for the front was I used a candle and kind of rubbed it along the edges prior to painting with my white paint. Well, actually it's Heritage Tradition all-in-one paint in cashmere. It's dried, doesn't take very long for it to dry, and now it's important to sand. You're not going to get it smooth if you have a rough piece of wood, but I needed to sand where I'm going to be placing an image and then eventually a stencil. The next thing you'll need is an image that you really like. I like to watch Our Green Acres on YouTube. She has wonderful project ideas, and one of the ones she had done, she had used this image. It's a free image from Pine and Prospect Home. You can go there and follow instructions to get this free painted image that young lady did. So I am tearing around the image because I don't want sharp edges. And another reason that I am using an image transfer rather than decoupage is because with decoupaging and paper, you can really see it easily. So in order to transfer the image, the first thing that you're going to need is DIY's liquid patina. That's what I'm brushing on right here on the board, and then you'll see me brush it in a moment on the face, the good side of the image. DIY liquid patina is kind of a threefer. It's a top coat, it's a decoupage medium, and in this instance it will transfer an image. Now if you use this process and you pick a picture that has writing on it, you'll need to make sure that you reverse or mirror the image prior to printing it. And that's another thing. This medium really only works well with laser printed pictures. So if you have an inkjet, I'm not sure it will work for you. I think the inks bleed or they don't transfer well. So I'm completely covering it, giving it a generous coat, getting my brush strokes fairly smooth, and notice again that I'm painting the good side of my image. You want to lay your image down very carefully. Place it exactly where you want it because you won't be able to move it after that. Smooth it down with your hands. And then I'm going to use a little plastic card to kind of gently scrape across it to kind of squish out any of that excess patina. Oh, I didn't use plastic. That's the problem because something happens here in just a second. I used my metal Japan scraper, and in one little part I tore a tiny little bit, and that's going to cause me to have to do some touch-up in the end. So use something plastic. I was lazy, I guess, and just grabbed what I had instead of getting up and going to get my little plastic junky credit card. See right there. There's where I tore it. You'll see in a minute how I have to fix that. Now we need to set it aside, let it dry overnight, 24 hours. It's the next day, so here comes the fun part. Using a sponge, it has a kind of a lightweight scrubby pad on one side and sponge on the other. You want to dampen your image. Don't rub too hard with that. You're just kind of getting that paper backing wet. And then slowly use your hands to rub and roll that paper. This is not hard to do. It's just that you have to be gentle and take your time with it and keep rubbing and rubbing until you get all of that white paper backing off. Now, don't rub too hard, or you can start to take the image up too. But one of the reasons I love this process is because if you were to decoupage this piece of paper on top of the wood, even tearing the edges, you would have a thickness there, and it would look like it was decoupaged versus painted on there. And I like this because it's flat and kind of muted, aged looking. But you can see here, I'm just rubbing and rubbing and rolling that paper off. Well, there it is. Isn't it cute? But I have one little mistake that I now have to fix. That's next. Remember when I showed you I had torn the paper a little bit in a tiny little hole? Well, now it's time to fix that. So grabbing some paints and some colors that I think will mute that, I'm very carefully going to dab a little paint in that area. Starting kind of with a light gray-green, similar to that background of that pumpkin. And I'll add in some brown and some black and kind of blend that out. And eventually you'll never know that it wasn't messed up in the first place. Just in case my paint colors weren't exactly matching, I went into some other areas of the picture, of the image, and added a little bit more color, especially the darker tones, to make sure that you'll never see it. I wanted to add some words at the top of this little sign, and I have a Cricut maker. So what I did was just type in Hi Pumpkin in my Cricut maker, and the font I used is Beautiful Lady. Then I cut out my stencil. Now, if you don't have a Cricut, you can do it the old-fashioned way and just print it on paper and then size it the way, size it first, how big you need it to be. It may print on 2 or 3 sheets. Print it, tape it together if need be, and then all you have to do is use transfer paper underneath it, carbon paper, and trace over your letters, and then you can hand paint it. That's the way I used to have to do it prior to getting my wonderful Cricut. Now here I am stenciling, and a helpful tip with stenciling, you want to offload that brush onto a paper towel and pounce up and down. Don't do a bunch of swirling motions or you're likely to get paint underneath the stencil. And that can still happen even with this method, but it's best to use not a dry brush, but almost. You want to put very light coats on. It's better to have to put 2 coats on than put 1 heavy coat on and have a lot of bleed through your stencil. The moment of truth. I am peeling back the vinyl actually right after I stenciled, so some of it was still a bit wet, so I was very careful in this step. And now I'm going to use my little picker to remove those extra vinyl pieces in the H and the P's and the K. For this next project, instead of one piece of wood, it's actually 4 pieces of Barnwood put together, and there's stabilization with a couple of boards on the back side screwed into it. Now, what I have done here is first I painted with Heritage Traditions all-in-one paint in Irish Garden, which is kind of a gray blue. And then I let that dry, and I dry brushed on the same brand, Heritage Traditions, in Crete, which is that kind of olivey green color. I plan to put an IOD transfer on this, and anytime you're going to put a transfer on, you have to seal first. Since I had DIY liquid patina available upstairs, all my other sealers were downstairs, that's what I'm using as a sealer coat. Now later on you'll see that I spray it with a matte sealer because this turned out a little bit too shiny for me. But it was a perfect medium to use as a sealer for the IOD transfers. I had already planned out and cut out the stencils that I was going to use, and they didn't quite fill up the whole area. So I decided to add a trim stamp at the bottom, and this is IOD Bohemia trim stamp. Now I've got 2 stamps on there, but I'm only using the top one. I didn't want to move the bottom one away because I'm using those 2 sets and exactly that spacing on a furniture piece downstairs. So I was just careful and just inked the top one. What I'm doing here, I got a little ink where it didn't need to be. This is IOD's ink. And now the thing about stamping is once you set it down and commit, that's where it's got to go, and you don't want to shift or scoot it at all. And I realized, okay, I need to start on the right side of my board there. So I placed it where I wanted it, hold with one hand, and gently rub. You want to rub all over. Now I believe I check it here in a minute. You can do that carefully by lifting up and seeing what kind of impression you're getting, and if you're good with it, then you can just go ahead and lift it straight up and continue. Now after stamping, I went ahead and used my hair dryer to heat set it. Otherwise you kind of have to wait 24 hours before you can put a top coat on it. Plus I was about to use the transfer, so I wanted to make sure that stamp was good and dry. The sections of transfer that I am using are from IOD's Midnight Garden, and I'm using the black and white parts of that transfer. So what I'm doing first is I'm going to lay out on the board exactly kind of placement where I want to put each thing. Now that I have my placement and I've done a little trimming, it's time to actually apply the transfer. So you pull the back off, peel the white backing off, and place your transfer onto your surface. You want to burnish it down pretty well, rub it pretty hard. And then using the stick that comes with the transfers, you begin to rub and rub and rub. I've demonstrated this in several of the other thrift flip videos where I've used transfers. You just have to really work on this to get the hang of it a little bit. And usually, once I've really rubbed like this, I'll take an edge, a corner, and kind of create a little pocket of air, like I'm doing right here, a little bubble, and slowly I pull back and press, make sure that all of the transfer is transferring to the surface and none is still stuck on the transfer sheet. Now this is a lot harder to do on a surface like this because, I mean, think about it. This is Barnwood. It's not smooth. And so, like right there, for example, I'm taking the tip of that plastic thing and kind of rubbing it into the crevices of the wood. Sorry for my hair being in the way. It's hard to be cameraman at the same time as being in front of the camera. Okay, well, I cropped it in a little tighter so you could see what I was doing, and maybe my little fuzzy hair won't be too distracting. When I do transfer, sometimes I try to create like a little air pocket and it helps to release, but on something like this, so textured, I do it a little differently. As you can see, I'm just kind of pulling up on the transfer sheet and double checking that the transfer is adhering to the surface. If not, you have to go back and rub. And again, this being so textured, it's way more difficult. But it's doable, and I think it came out to a beautiful finish. One other thing I want to note here, I am using an X-Acto knife to actually trim the transfer in between the boards. Anytime I have a gap or space like that, whether I'm doing a furniture piece and it's drawers, I like to cut the transfer. First off, you're working with a smaller section at a time. Plus, I can use that little stick as I'm rubbing to actually push the little itty bitty part of the transfer down into the side of the board or the drawer or whatever the space might be. To do some final touches on this pumpkin, I am using Dixie Belle's Best Dang Wax in black. Now, I didn't video showing it, but I have already sprayed a couple of coats of the Rust-Oleum chalk paint top coat clear in matte, and that did work to dull down that shinier DIY liquid patina. Now, in applying the wax, I'm just going around the edges and I'm using a rag and just applying and softening it. It was very important that I have a sealer, either a sealer or a clear wax on first prior to doing this. But I think just kind of darkening the edges gives it the effect that I wanted it to have, kind of old and rustic. Lastly, I needed to decorate the top, and I'm using what I've used on a lot of my other pumpkins. It is a brown fabric coated wire I bought on Amazon, and I'll link that in the description box below the video. When I use the wire, I make sure I leave long pieces on each end to eventually make the little curlicues like you would see on a real pumpkin vine. But here, I'm just using some scrap material and creating kind of a little rag bow for the top side of it. And again, I'm using just that fabric coated wire to tie the bow in place. To make my little curlicues, I just use something round, sometimes different sizes. Here I'm just using the end of a paintbrush and winding, and then you just slip the paintbrush out and move your little curly around. It's cute. all of these signs, the ideas for these signs was inspired by Our Green Acres. And this one is going to be super simple and quick. She used this stencil and gave the link, Amazon link, and I thought, yep, I've got to get that. I will list the link as well in the description box below. But basically, I didn't paint these 3 pieces of Barnwood at all. I just sanded them a little bit, and I'm using white paint, chalk paint. Again, it's the Cashmere Heirloom and Traditions, but it wouldn't matter. You could use any white chalk paint, any color chalk paint. I just thought the white on the raw wood would look really good. So I'm just pouncing. You'll notice here, not a lot of product. And every now and then I'm checking to see how well it's transferring. And voila! The reveal. Isn't it so cute? I'll add a few embellishments to the top to make it look more like a pumpkin. And it's done. Stay tuned. The next thrift flip video will be these 4x4 pumpkin blocks with transferred images and IOD molds. I'll show you exactly how I did them. If you like these project videos, please consider liking and subscribing to our channel. And as always, bye and have a good one.